NPR News, and I'm Angela Davis. We're breaking into our programming to bring you live coverage of the sentencing of Derek Chauvin. He is the former Minneapolis police officer who was found guilty in the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020. Now, back in April of this year, jurors in Hennepin County convicted Chauvin of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. And now he is about to learn how many years the judge in the case is sentencing him to for the crime that he committed. Now, that sentencing hearing is taking place at the Hennepin County Courthouse in downtown Minneapolis. It's scheduled to begin at 1:30 this afternoon, so in about 10 minutes from now. While we wait for it to start, I want to bring in my colleague, NPR News reporter and editor Brant Williams. He's here in the studio with me today. Hi, Brant.
Hi, Angela.
Well, Brant, we know there's a wide range in the number of years that Judge Peter Cahill could choose for Chauvin's sentence, and that he's only being sentenced for the most serious of the convictions, which is that second-degree murder charge. And so, Brant, tell us about the state guidelines for a maximum sentence and a minimum in this case.
Right. So, given Chauvin's lack of a criminal history, that's one of the cases that his defense is making for why he shouldn't have as long as the maximum, which is about 40 years in the state of Minnesota. But of course, the sentencing guidelines would make that a much lighter sentence, about 10 to 15 years in prison for someone like Chauvin, who again has no criminal history. So that presumptive sentence would be about 12 and a half years.
And we know the attorneys in the case, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, they have made recommendations to the judge for the sentence. So let's start with the prosecutors, Brant. What are they recommending as a sentence for Derek Chauvin?
Right. They want to see a 30-year sentence for Derek Chauvin.
And what about Chauvin's defense attorney, Eric Nelson? What has he recommended to the judge as an appropriate sentence?
Right. So Eric Nelson is recommending probation, which would be basically time served that he's already spent behind bars, and then just spend the rest of his sentence out of prison.
And have we heard from legal experts at all, about this, like where they think the judge could possibly fall in between that range?
We're getting a bunch of different responses from the experts that we've reached out to. I mean, again, the judge has this wide latitude from which to choose from. Now, there's going to be there's already been paperwork filed. There's always been the motions filed. Each side has given their reasons for why they think why the judge should give the type of sentence that they're asking for. Now, of course, the state has asked for the judge to consider these aggravating factors. And Judge Cahill has already agreed to those. And that's something that is when somebody has committed a crime such as this, the judge can say, look, because there are these factors that were met, that would justify going over what that recommended sentence may be. And in Chauvin's case, the judge has already found that he abused his position of authority as a police officer. He determined that Floyd was treated with particular cruelty, as he said, and that the crime was committed by a group of people. Chauvin was a part of a group, and that there were children present at the scene.
So we have those four aggravating factors that Judge Cahill has the ability to consider, and he's already stated that he agrees that there are four of them in this case that apply. Brent, there are cameras in the courtroom that will allow us to see and hear what is happening. And what do we know about who's allowed to be in the room this afternoon, in addition to Derek Chauvin and Judge Cahill and the attorneys for the prosecution and the defense in the case?
Right. There is room there for family members of both George Floyd and of Derek Chauvin's. And we expect that there will be a number of people who will give what are called victim impact statements. And so we could be expected to listen to some of those today, too.
And we've seen these victim impact statements in other cases. And often it's family members, people who describe how they were harmed by the loss of a loved one.
That's correct. And they can be as you can imagine, very emotional. I covered trials involving one that comes to mind is the trial of Beverly Burrell, who was convicted of third-degree murder in the deaths of 5 men that she sold drugs to and who died. And some of those sentencing hearings were quite dramatic, as you can imagine. There were family members who were talking about how the acts of the convicted this convicted person impacted their lives, what they will lose. And you can imagine that there will be members of Floyd's family who will talk about what they lost when Derek Chauvin kneeled on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes last year.
And is it possible that we will hear Derek Chauvin speak today? Will he have an opportunity to say something, do you think?
Yes, that is something that is also a part of these hearings. The person who is convicted does have the opportunity to put in their own words what they want to say to the family. Perhaps there would be an apology, a statement of remorse. Perhaps Chauvin will explain his actions to explain why he did what he did last year.
As we wait for the sentencing of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin to begin, I also want to let our listeners know that there are news conferences scheduled to start immediately after the sentencing, where we will hear from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, as well as attorneys for the family members of George Floyd, and as well as family members themselves. We also know Reverend Al Sharpton is scheduled to speak. Those news conferences, we plan to bring that to you live as well. Well, right now I want to bring in another guest to offer some legal analysis of this case. We're talking with retired Judge Kevin Burke, who is joining us now on the phone. Hello to you, Judge Burke.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm all right. Good afternoon. Judge Burke, you recently retired from the Hennepin County District Court, and that is where Chauvin was tried and is being sentenced this afternoon. You were also the chief judge there for several years and most recently served as a senior judge for the state of Minnesota. Let's talk about the wide range in years of a possible sentence. Where do you think Judge Cahill will land and why?
I don't know where he's going to land. I could guess, but I'm not gonna.
Well,
the guidelines provide a mechanism that is. It's not like you have unbridled discretion. It's pretty clear that the Judge Cahill has decided there's a basis to depart upward. But even if you depart upward, you need substantial and compelling reasons. And generally speaking, you could possibly depart by doubling the presumptive sentence, which would then get you somewhere in the 23, 24 year range. Anything after that, it becomes even more problematic. I saw a quote from Fred Fink, who was a longtime prosecutor in Ramsey in Washington County, and he said that in the 40 some odd second-degree murder cases he had prosecuted, there was never an example in which somebody got 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Good to know.
So we'll just have to wait and see.
Now, the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, he has asked for probation for Derek Chauvin. Do you think that's likely at all, Judge?
To depart from the guidelines, you'd need substantial and compelling reasons to depart downward like that. Given the fact that Judge Cahill has already found their aggravating factors, I think it's unlikely that he's going to get probation. I mean, I was a judge for 36 years. The only time that I departed on a second-degree murder case to give probation was a guy who had such severe heart problems that he was going to die within months. And realistically, had I sent him to prison, the prison would have had to put him in a nursing home almost the day that he got there. Mm-hmm. So it would be unusual to have that happen.
Judge Burke, we had a new development just this morning. We learned that Judge Cahill denied the defense motion for a new trial for Derek Chauvin. How significant is that?
It's pretty predictable. A motion for a new trial does get granted, but it doesn't happen very often. And so I don't think that anyone should be particularly surprised about that, nor should they read into it some sign of what Judge Cahill is going to do.
Again, we're standing by for the start of the sentencing hearing for Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer found guilty in the murder of George Floyd. That murder happened in May of 2020. Derek Chauvin found guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter in April. And talking to Brant Williams here at the NPR studios with me today. Brant, we should note that the Hennepin County Government Center is closed to the general public today. Only participants in the hearing and the county staff are allowed to be there,
right.
As well as two pool reporters who will share with others what's happening in the courtroom. What do we know about security in and around the building?
Well,
can I just add one thing
go ahead, Judge.
to Brent?
Yeah, go ahead, Judge Burke.
In the pre-sentence investigation, the defendant is given an opportunity to say their version of what they want to say to the judge. So it's possible that Judge Cahill might know what Chauvin was going to say in the courtroom,
right,
or at least in some outline. And it's possible Chauvin said to the probation officer, "I don't want to talk to you." And I obviously, and we don't know.
Matter before the court, the state of Minnesota versus Derek Michael Chauvin. District Court file number is 27 CR 20-12646. Matters on for sentencing. Counsel note your appearances beginning with the state.
Good afternoon, Matthew Frank, Assistant Attorney General on behalf of the state.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Jerry Blackwell from the state of Minnesota.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Steve Slisher on behalf of the state of Minnesota.
Your Honor, Keith Ellison, Attorney General on behalf of the state of Minnesota.
And for the defense.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Eric Nelson and Amy Voss appearing on behalf of Mr. Chauvin.
Thank you. We are still, for all those attending, under somewhat modified COVID restrictions, so we are asking that everyone keep their masks on unless they are speaking. I'll ask for people who are speaking to come up to the lectern and use the microphones, and please to remove your mask so that we can hear you clearly, and also to maintain the distances that we have set out in the courtroom. With that, we'll proceed first with the state. Mr. Blackwell, you may proceed with victim input.
Your Honor, we have 4 victim impact statements. We will start with the 7-year-old daughter of George Floyd, Gianna Floyd, who will present hers by video.
What do you miss most about your daddy?
Well, I ask about him all the time. And that's kind of it.
Yeah. Well, when you ask about him, what are you asking about?
Well, I was asking, how did my dad get hurt?
Do you wish that he was still here with us?
Yeah, but he is.
Through his spirit?
Yes.
Yes. And when you see your daddy again one day, what do you want to do when you see him?
I want to play with him.
What kind of games do you want to play with him?
I want to play with him, have fun, go on a plane ride, and that's it.
Yeah.
We used to have dinner meals every single night before we went to bed. My daddy always used to help me brush my teeth.
Oh. Do you miss him helping brush your teeth?
Yes.
How do you hope that the world remembers him?
Well, they help him because those mean people did something to him.
Yeah. If you could say anything to your daddy right now, what would it be?
It would be, I miss you and I love you.
All right. Thank you, Gianna. I really appreciate you answering questions today.
That was Gianna Floyd. Your Honor, next we'll hear from the nephew of George Floyd, Brandon Williams. Mr. Williams.
If you could begin by giving us your full name and spelling each of your names.
Brandon Williams, Brandon Williams.
Thank you. You may proceed.
On Monday, May 25th, 2020, George Perry Floyd Jr. was murdered by Derek Chauvin in a malicious and insidious display of hate and abuse of power. Chovin killed George. Not only did he kill George, but he also displayed a total lack of consideration for human life as he did so. You saw it, I saw it, and millions of people across this country and the globe witnessed the act of hate. A year and 1 month later, I stand here before you tasked with the duty of expressing how George's death has impacted me personally and the rest of our family. As I racked my brain and thought about what I could say today, I came to this conclusion. It is humanly impossible for me to stand here and convey or articulate the right words that would capture all that we are feeling and what we have felt over this period. So please bear with me as I attempt the impossible. The sudden murder of George has forever traumatized us. You may see us cry, but the full extent of our pain and trauma will never be seen with the naked eye. The heartbreak and hurt goes far beyond any number of tears we could ever cry. Words simply cannot express the pain, anguish, and suffering that our family and friends have endured since George's murder. It has been truly unimaginable, but not as nearly unimaginable as the defendant's decision to take the life of a human being with no regard for the effect it may have on others. Although Chovin will be sentenced today and spend time in prison, he will have the luxury of seeing his family again, talking to them, and he will likely get to spend time with them upon his release. These are all luxuries that my young cousin Gianna was robbed of when Chovin made the active decision to kill our father. There will be no more birthday parties, no graduations, holiday gatherings, or other family celebrations. The laughter, hugs, guidance, advice, sense of security, and those opportunities to simply say I love you are forever gone. They say time heals all, and while I generally believe that saying, it's challenging to do so given these unfathomable set of circumstances. Before I conclude, I must highlight a few things. George's murder, this trial, and everything in between has been tragic and devastating. Our family is forever broken, and one thing we cannot get back is George Floyd. It is the request of my family that the maximum penalty for the crime for which the defendant was convicted be imposed. On behalf of my family, friends, community, and supporters, I wish to express my sincerest gratitude for allowing us opportunities of expression. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, first, just for the record, this wonderful lady standing here is a Hennepin County victim advocate.
Ms. Boswell is well known to the court.
Yes, thank you, Judge.
And so, Your Honor, we'll next hear from the brother of George Floyd, Mr. Terrence Floyd.
And Mr. Floyd, if you could state your full name, spelling each of your names.
Yes. Terrence Floyd. That's Terrence, Floyd, Floyd.
Go ahead.
I'm here representing my brother. I'm from New York. On May 25th, 2020, my brother was murdered, everyone knows, by Derek Chauvin. The facts of this case were proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and 3 guilty verdicts have been rendered. This situation has really affected me and my family. any family member that has went through this, we are part of a fraternity of families, and it's not one of those, fraternities that you enjoy. I just, over this last year and months, I actually talked to a few people, and I wanted to know from the man himself, why? What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on my brother's neck? Why when you knew that he posed no threat anymore, he was handcuffed, why you didn't at least get up? Why you stayed there? A month before my brother was murdered, I was on the phone with him, and we had a long conversation. And as I looked at the video of my niece, the last conversation me and my brother had was he wanted to have play dates. He wanted to plan play dates with Gianna and my daughter, and we started setting it up. That can't happen. And I have to, my daughter's still young, but I still have to explain to her, because this is history. This is a case everybody knows about. So she's gonna find out, and I'm gonna have to explain that to her. And I think that's, to me, harder than even just standing here, that I have to talk to my daughter and tell her, about her niece, about her uncle, about the situation. That's basically reliving it all over again, years down the line. I'm here on behalf of my family, on behalf of me and my family, we seek the maximum penalty. We don't want to see no more slaps on the wrists. We've been through that already. In my community, in my culture, we've been through that already. Smacked on the wrist. No. Because if it was us, the roles was reversed, there wouldn't be no case. It would have been open and shut. We'd have been under the jail for murdering somebody. So we asked for that same penalty for Derek Chauvin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, the final victim impact statement for the state will come from George Floyd's brother, Phalonis Floyd.
And sir, if you could begin by giving us your full name and spell each of your names, and I have permitted you to use your phone because you have notes on it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And you may proceed when you're ready. Giving us your full name first.
Phalonis Floyd, spelled P-H-I-L-O-N-I-S-E. Last name Floyd, F-L-O-I-D.
And you may proceed.
One year ago, May 25th, my brother George was murdered by Derek Chauvin and his co-defendants in broad daylight with a knee to his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I was a trucker, and immediately my life changed forever. I began to speak to the world for George from the United Nations, Africa, Canada, Japan, and so many other countries. Every day, I have begged for justice to be served, reliving the execution of George, while others begged and pleaded for Officer Chauvin to simply just allow George to take a breath. I haven't had a real night's sleep because of the nightmares I constantly have hearing my brother beg and plead for his life over and over again. Even saying, "They're going to kill me. Please, officer." Screaming for our mom. I have had to sit through each day of Officer Derek Chauvin's trial and watch the video of George dying for hours over and over again. For an entire year, I had to relive George being tortured to death every hour of the day, only taking naps and not knowing what a good night's sleep is anymore. I've been lifting my voice tirelessly every day so that George's death will not be in vain. Honorable Judge Peter Cahill, I thank you for allowing me to share this today. George's life mattered. So my family and I, most of all, my niece, Gianna. My niece, Gianna, she needs closure. I'm asking that you please find it suitable to give Officer Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, charge that he has been found guilty for. My family and I have been given a life sentence. We will never be able to get George back. Daddy's our daughter's first love. He would never be able to walk Gianna down the aisle at her wedding, attend those magical moments of her life like a daddy-daughter dance, sweet 16 party, seeing her out for prom graduations, and she would never be able to have any personal memories with her father. With a smirk on his face and children present, Officer Chauvin used excessive force and acted against his training. Chauvin had no regards for human life, George's life. I stand before you today asking you to please help us find closure by giving Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, making sure he does his time consecutively without the possibilities of parole, probation, or getting out early for good behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Here today, of course, for sentencing, gives us an opportunity to speak about other matters that I think are involved in sentencing and where we are in the criminal justice system in the processing of this case. As a member of an elected office representing the people of the state of Minnesota, as well as the people of the local community, I want to say a couple of things. And first of all, I want to really thank some of the police officers in the Minneapolis Police Department who, under great pressure, great stress, and to some extent at peril to their occupations, what they've devoted their life to, stuck to their oath and their commitment as police officers to speak openly and honestly about policing and the training that is given and received by police officers. Those officers didn't hide behind a blue wall. They came forward, they told this court and those jurors what they knew about training and responsibility, and I think they deserve recognition and credit for that. Would also like to thank members of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. You know, those agents get called in, great sacrifice to their personal lives. Whenever things happen, they go. They did that here, and under really extraordinary circumstances, completed a very professional and thorough investigation. You know, conducting interviews is hard enough, but conducting them in the atmosphere of the city following the murder of George Floyd was even more difficult. And they did so, I think, above and beyond the call of duty. And I want to thank them for doing that on behalf of the whole prosecution staff. You know, I want to thank the family, the loved ones, the friends of George Floyd. They have been through so much more than families involved in murder cases. He's right. It's a fraternity you don't want to be part of. But they've been through so much more because of the pandemic and because of security, safety precautions that we've had to take. They have been through a lot. At a time when they try to grieve, like everybody does for the loss of someone, they are going through so much more. And I want to thank them, all of them, the family. The court saw a testimony from Philonise Floyd, Courtney Ross. These are people who are trying to deal with their loss, but they have to do it in a very public way and under very trying circumstances through no fault of their own. So I thank them. They have all been models of grace and understanding. And it's really remarkable, quite frankly. I'll, I think, come back to them again in a little bit. Your Honor, we have submitted a sentencing brief. I would incorporate that. I guess I would incorporate my comments today into that memo. But I do think there are things that I want to bring out today in my arguments. For hundreds of years, the court had discretion in sentencing. It was the trial court's decision on what a sentence should be. The recognition that the trial court sat through the trial, watched the evidence, and saw how it affected people, informed the court's discretion. When the legislature passed the guidelines, in a legitimate attempt to try and even out sentences, they defined certain presumptive sentences, as we all know, for typical crimes. For each crime, the typical crime. But they did not remove discretion for sentencing judges. They recognized that nobody is better suited to decide whether this is the typical case represented by that guideline's presumptive sentence, or if there are reasons why this is worse than that. And the guideline still gives this court discretion when there are aggravating factors to give a more serious sentence than what the guideline's presumption calls for. And as you know, we are asking you to do that today. As this court found, there are 4 aggravating factors that we have identified. They go beyond a list of just what those factors are. We have not just done our homework and found a list. The court made good findings, detailed findings about those factors, and we think they justify a greatly increased sentence. This is not the typical second-degree unintentional murder. The Supreme Court in our state has said that, and very recently, even 1 aggravating factor is sufficient to go twice the top of the range. Here we have 4. The first one that the court found is an abusive position of trust and authority. And the court specifically found that when Mr. Chauvin was acting as a police officer, he had a position of trust and authority. That is certainly true. We trust police officers. We trust them when we need help. We call them for help. We trust that they're going to take care of the problems that they are assigned to deal with, right? We trust them. We also give them great authority. We give them great power. We give them power to use force that individuals would be prosecuted for using. right? We give them authority to arrest, to detain. And with great power, of course, comes great responsibility. So they're not sent out there by themselves to do this. They're given substantial training. This court saw all of that through the trial, in general and in specific to Mr. Chauvin and the other 3 officers. They're given training on the use of force, the proportional use of force. The force used has to be warranted by the threat. They're given training on de-escalation because we recognize that police officers are called in when people are not having their best day, when people might be affected by mental illness, drug abuse, any number of issues. They're just having a bad day, and they're trained for that and should be. And they're taught how to use that to de-escalate and control a situation. They're taught medical intervention. They're taught to provide medical attention to people who need it. Being a police officer is a difficult job. We ask a lot of them. It's a profession, there's no doubt about it. But we give them a substantial amount of training, and most officers do it right. This case wasn't about police officers, all police officers. It wasn't about policing. This case was about Derek Chauvin disregarding all that training he received and assaulting Mr. Floyd until he suffocated to death. One of the things that you heard, Your Honor, and the jurors heard that can really encapsulate, I think, a very important issue here. 7 words. In your custody is in your care. And it's a real simple mantra. It's a real easy thing to remember. If you're going to take custody of somebody, you have to provide care. You have to do it in a caring way. You can't simply disregard their care. Mr. Chauvin abused his position of trust and authority as a police officer by doing just that, just disregarding all his training. It was an abuse of that because what did he decide to do? We often are forced in this, criminal justice system to infer people's state of mind by their conduct and their statements. What was Derek Chauvin's endgame here? What was the plan? It seems apparent the plan was hold him down until we can dump him in an ambulance and no longer have him be our problem. You recall he said to Charles McMillan, he's a big guy, might be on something. That's it. He held Mr. Floyd down as Mr. Floyd begged for his life. He had the other officers help in that regard. And rather than doing the simple expedient of putting him on his side, he said, yeah, He was dismissive to that duty of care. We trust that arrestees will be treated with respect, reasonable force, and that their medical needs will be addressed. I'm paraphrasing from the court's findings. That trust was violated. We trust that they will use their authority reasonably, and this was a particularly egregious abuse of that force. Again, paraphrasing the court's findings. The typical second-degree murder does not involve that extent of abuse of a dearly held position of abuse or a position of authority and trust by the community and by individuals of the community. Your Honor found that Mr. Floyd was treated by Mr. Chauvin with particular cruelty. I think tortured is the right word. We know that, we've all seen it. Mr. Floyd did not want to be in the back seat. That's it. That's the rub. It was the need to get him in that back seat no matter what. And we all saw that once he was pulled out of that back seat, he calmed right down, even willingly went down to the ground. I'm going down, he said. And he went down to the ground, not fighting, not punching, and he was placed initially on his side. He's already handcuffed. He's placed on his side in the recovery position, like he should be, because he's trying to breathe, and then quickly placed prone on the ground, face down. Mr. Chauvin put his left knee on George Floyd's neck, his right knee on George Floyd's back, face down on the pavement. Had Officer King sit on Mr. Floyd's waist area, and had Officer Lane hold his feet down. You can even see Mr. Floyd trying to pull his feet up. We all are going to fight to breathe. Everybody knows that fear when you all of a sudden realize you're having trouble breathing. It's just innate, right? We want to survive. We know we have to breathe. And there's an automatic reaction when you begin to feel like that is threatened. And you can see Mr. Floyd going through that. He tries to pull his feet up. But he's held down by these three officers while Officer Tao is looking on. And later, of course, goes to keep the people who want to help away. He's placed face down on this pavement so harshly that it rubs the skin off his face. He has injuries to his face from being face down on that pavement. He has injuries to his knuckles from just trying to lift himself up. And he's telling Officer Chauvin, I can't breathe. I'm dying. And Mr. Chauvin's response was, And all this time, I mean, imagine what Mr. Floyd is going through. If we're going to talk about particular cruelty and torture, really try to appreciate what he's going through. He knows he's suffocating. We all know that feeling of not being able to breathe enough. And he's begging, he's pleading, and he's being ignored. His concerns are being dismissed by somebody who has taken custody but not care. He was kept in that prone position for 9.5 minutes and was suffocated. There's no other way to say it. That's particularly cruel. That is more cruel than the typical second-degree unintentional murder. Significantly more. This is not a momentary gunshot, punch to the face. This is 9.5 minutes of cruelty to a man who was helpless and just begging for his life. This court found that there were children present, standing only a few feet from these officers. These children, who were ages 17 and one child age 9. Why is that an aggravating factor? Well, I think everybody can figure that out. Right? It's particularly bad to commit a crime in front of children. We've heard a lot of academia about the development of the young brain and how long it can take. And here you got a couple of teenage girls and a 9-year-old girl. How are they going to process this? Standing feet from a man being suffocated by police officers. Such a stark sight that one of the children even says, we got to call the police on the police. How do you process that as a 9-year-old? The children were not only present watching a man die. We've all seen, if you haven't, you really need to. Look at George Floyd's face as he's dying, he's suffering. The children have to watch this. But not only that, it's police officers, and there are people around them wanting to help. And at one point, and sure, they got upset. And at one point, Mr. Chauvin points his mace, grabs his mace to keep him back. How does a child look at that? There's another officer screaming at them to get back. The typical second-degree unintentional murder doesn't involve children standing feet away watching a 9.5-minute suffocation of a man begging for his life. This court also made a finding that the defendant committed the offense with the involvement of 3 or more other persons. Lane and King were involved directly in the restraint, and that Tao kept the bystanders at bay. I've already talked a little bit about Lane and King's role in holding Mr. Floyd down. They recognized that he was pulseless, that Mr. Floyd was pulseless at one point, and yet really made no effort to take care of the person in their custody. Officer Tao watched most of the suffocation and then only went over to keep people from giving help. One person who is identified as a medical trained firefighter for the city of Minneapolis, and that was dismissed. Like, are we going to believe her? So they kept trained medical people from providing help. These were all uniformed peace officers, adding to that abuse of trust and authority. You know, I know the defense has asked the court for probation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing that. It's so outside of the realm of, I think, real possibility. This is a murder. I understand some of the arguments made on behalf of Mr. Chauvin. I understand, well, no, I can't understand what his family members and friends are going through. I can't. But it's certainly not enough for a departure to probation for a second-degree murder. We believe, Your Honor, that these 4 aggravating factors and the findings that the court has made certainly justify an upward departure because there are 4 of them, not standing alone, but in a sense, not overlapping, but coming together to show this is not the typical second-degree murder. This is egregious. And this justifies a double upward departure. From the top of the box, which is 180 months, we're asking the court to do a double departure, recognizing all 4 factors, to 360 months. As I mentioned before, Your Honor, this is sentencing. This is the time for victims, right? This is the time for the loved ones of the victim and the community to have a say. Again, I commend this family. I commend all of the loved ones, the friends, the people that have been involved in this case for tolerating and being gracious. None of this, of course, can bring George Floyd back. That's very true. But this is the time for our criminal justice system to say, we hear you. This is the time for their criminal justice system to say, we recognize that this harm you're going through is real, and while we can't feel what you're feeling, we know we can do what your criminal justice system should do and recognize the severity of this crime and reflect that in the sentence to be given. It's time for this criminal justice system to say, we recognize this is more serious than the typical second-degree unintentional murder. The 4 reasons the court found reflect that and give this court more than an adequate basis to do that. Your Honor, we ask the court to impose a sentence of 360 months, commitment to the Commissioner of Corrections. As you know, Your Honor, there are no fines in murder cases. And we would ask the court just to reserve the issue of restitution, so we can clarify that with the family and present that to the court for 30 days. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further from the state?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Nelson. I'm sorry. Mr. Blackwell?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, just thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the defendant's mother, Carolyn Palenti, would like to address the court.
If you could state your full name, spelling each of your names, and proceed when you're ready.
Carolyn, Carolyn, Palenty, Pawlenty. I am the mother of Derek Chauvin. I am here to speak on behalf of my entire family. On November 25th, 2020, not only did Derek's life change forever, but so did mine and my family's. Derek devoted 19 years of his life to the Minneapolis Police Department. It has been difficult for me to hear and read what the media, public, and prosecution team believe Derek to be an aggressive, heartless, and uncaring person. I can tell you that is far from the truth. My son's identity has also been reduced to that as a racist. I want this court to know that none of these things are true and that my son is a good man. Derek always dedicated his life and time to the police department. Even on his days off, he would call in to see if they needed help. Derek is a quiet, thoughtful, honorable, and selfless man. He has a big heart, and he always has put others before his own. The public will never know the loving and caring man he is, but his family does. Even though I have not spoken publicly, I have always supported him 100% and always will. Derek has played over and over in his head the events of that day. I've seen the toll it has taken on him. I believe a lengthy sentence will not serve Derek well. When you sentence my son, you will also be sentencing me. I will not be able to see Derek, talk to him on the phone, or give him our special hug. Plus the fact that when he is released, his father and I most likely will not be here. Derek, my happiest moment is when I gave birth to you. And my second is when I was honored to pin your police badge on you. I remember you whispering to me, "Don't stick me with it." Derek, I want you to know I have always believed in your innocence, and I will never waver from that. I have read numerous letters from people around the world that also believe in your innocence. No matter where you go, where you are, I will always be there to visit you. I promise you I will stay strong, as we talked about, and I want you to do the same for me. I will do what you told me to do, take care of myself, so I will be here for you when you come home. Remember, there is no stronger bond or love than a mother's love. And one final thought I want you to remember. Remember, you are my favorite son. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. It is my intent that my remarks this afternoon be quite brief. I do not intend to relitigate the facts of this case, nor spend any substantial time looking at the law. The court is very familiar with the facts of this case, and the parties have fully briefed the court relevant to the sentencing factors. And we recognize that in any case, any sentencing that comes before the court is tasked with a difficult job. The court must craft a sentence that serves the interests of justice, a rather nebulous term. The court must take into consideration the victim impact, public interests, as well as the circumstances and the history of the defendant. And in this case, more than any other, that likely any of us have ever been involved in, that task is exceedingly more difficult. In my remarks today, I just wish to briefly address each of those three considerations, starting with the public impact. As I believe we are all cognizant of, this case is at the epicenter of a cultural and political divide. We tried to keep a lot of that out of the courtroom during the trial and make this case about the facts. But we recognize what has happened as a result of this case. There are a great number of people who will view any sentence you pronounce as overly lenient and insufficient to satisfy justice. But there are an equal number of people who will view any sentence you pronounce as draconian or overbearing. Either way, some percentage of the public will view your sentence as a miscarriage of justice. The intensity of the public interest in this case cannot be understated. I trust that the volume of correspondence that each of us has received from the public at large is indicative of these very sentiments on both sides. As I was informed just yesterday, the Attorney General's office established a website, web submission, to accept community impact statements. Again, in my understanding is in a little over 2 weeks they received over 1,000 submissions. Again, on both sides. By my very best estimate, since my representation of Mr. Chauvin began last summer, I would estimate that I have received over 5,000 emails, over 1,000 voicemails, and hundreds of handwritten letters. Again, from both sides. And I expect that Your Honor has likewise been inundated with public comment and scrutiny. The impact that this case has had on this community is profound. It goes far beyond what happened on May 25th of last year. It has been at the forefront of our national consciousness, and it has weaved its way into nearly every facet of our lives, from the entertainment that we consume to the presidential politics, from protests to conspiracy theories. In the end, it is my sincere hope that when this proverbial dust settles, the community impact brings forth principled debate and civil public discourse, and ultimately leaves a positive effect on the city of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, and the United States. But nevertheless, while this court may consider the community impact, it is for these very same reasons that the court must turn to the foundational legal principles and remember that justice is blind. law is built on reason and common sense, and it cannot be permitted to be assailed by public opinion. Turning to the second consideration, which is the victim impact, the death of George Floyd. The death of George Floyd was tragic. He is loved by his family members. He is loved by his friends. And his death is justifiably mourned by those whose lives he impacted. He is a son, a brother, a father, an uncle, and a friend to many. And as the court heard today, the impact and the loss of his life, simply just, it can't be simplified. And it will take time. Finally, Your Honor, the court must take into consideration, just like it has to take into consideration the aggravating factors, it needs to take into consideration the mitigating factors. And the mitigating factors as set forth by the sentencing guidelines really point to the TROG analysis, essentially, ultimately in this case. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, again, arguing for a probationary sentence. That's briefed. But that being said, when we look at the TROG factors, who is Derek Chauvin? Derek Chauvin spent 19 years as a Minneapolis police officer. He loved being a police officer. I was contacted during the course of my representation and have had numerous conversations with his fellow police officers or fellow police officers that worked with Derek, some retired, some still active. And they told me that he was a solid police officer, that he did his job, that if somebody asked him to do a particular task, he never complained, he did it. One person told me that one of his sergeants told me that if I had asked him to dig a ditch for 8 hours, he would have picked up a shovel and he would have never complained for a second. He would have done his job. He was decorated as a police officer. Multiple life-saving awards. He was decorated for valor. He was proud to be a police officer because what he liked to do was help people. And as the statistics show, the vast majority of police work is helping people. He was proud to be a Minneapolis police officer. He served his country as in the United States Army. And he too is a son, and a brother, and a father, and a friend. He too, his life, the life he's lived, he's not coming into this as a career criminal with 6 points, 5 points, 4 points. He's coming into this never having violated the law because he lived an honorable life and he attempted to live an honorable life. Derek Chauvin was not even scheduled to work on May 25th, 2020. He volunteered because there was short staffing at the time. I know from numerous conversations that I've had with Derek that his brain is littered with what ifs. What if I just had not agreed to go in that day? What if things had gone differently? What if I never responded to that call? What if? The truth of the matter is, and the end result is that we are here after a jury verdict, finding him guilty of these offenses. And the court's consideration should not only be focused on the aggravating factors, but the mitigating factors as well. The Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission was established for a reason. And yes, the court in circumstances like these has discretion to go beyond and aggravate a sentence beyond the presumptive sentences established by the sentencing guidelines. But the sentencing guidelines don't differentiate between second-degree murders. Someone robs a liquor store, a police officer is involved in an incident, and a person dies in police custody. the law presumes, the legislature presumes, that the sentencing guidelines as established is a sufficient penalty for all of the second-degree murder categories or cases you would see. From 2019 back to 2010, a total of 90 people were sentenced for second-degree murder. Those sentences, those people, there were more than that, but people who had a 0 criminal history score, more than 90 people were sentenced. 67%, or 60 of those 90 people, received a guideline sentence of 150 months. So 2/3 of all people in this same position received a guideline sentence. 20% received an aggravated sentence, 18 of the 90, and 13% or 12 individuals were granted mitigated departures. So if the legislature and the intent of the sentencing guidelines is to eliminate sentencing disparity, the law should presume that the guideline sentence is what is appropriate in this case. Judge you may take into consideration at this point those aggravating factors, but you have to counterbalance them, which is the goal of the law, with the mitigating factors. I know that this has been an incredibly difficult case for the Floyd family to have to endure. The state of Minnesota, likewise, the prosecutors in this case have endured quite a bit, as has Mr. Chauvin's family. This is a case that has changed the world to some degree, and I hope it's positive. But it's my hope that the court follows the sentencing guidelines, applies the law in a reasoned manner, and imposes a just sentence.
Actually, Mr. Chovin, would you join Mr. Nelson at the lectern? Mr. Chovin, this is your opportunity if you wish to give any input to the court, and so I turn it over to you and your attorney.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, due to some additional legal matters at hand, I'm not able to give a full formal statement at this time. But very briefly, though, I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
And I'll note that I did read your comments in the pre-sentence investigation as well.
Thanks, Fred.
All right, we are going to take a 15-minute recess so that I can complete the sentencing order based on what I've heard today. And let's reconvene at 2:45. We're in recess.
News reporter and editor Brant Williams. We have been watching and listening to the sentencing hearing for Derek Chauvin. He is the former Minneapolis police officer who was found guilty in the murder of George Floyd. That murder happened in May of 2020, and then back in April of this year, as you know, jurors there in Hennepin County convicted Chauvin of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. And now he is about to learn how many years the judge in the case, Judge Peter Cahill there, is sentencing him to for the crime he committed. That hearing started there in downtown Minneapolis at 1:30 this afternoon. We just heard the judge say that they're on a break now until 2:45. And we've been listening to some very powerful victim impact statements. And Brand, a lot to talk about here. Let's start with the mother of Derek Chauvin, who spoke. It's the first time we've seen her, heard from her, and what she had to say to the judge and to Derek Chauvin himself.
Right. Chauvin's mother, Carolyn Palenti, got up and said that she was speaking on behalf of the entire family. She talked about the family's experience with this and their desire to defend Chauvin against all the the types of characterizations that people have made about him. She said it was hard for her to listen to how the media and the public described Chauvin. She said they described him as being aggressive and heartless. Also, that they identified him as being a racist. She said none of these things are true. She said her son is a good man, and said he had a big heart. She also had a few comments, which I'm guessing were a little bit of levity, I guess. She mentioned that her two happiest moments, one was the day that she gave birth to him, and the other was the day that she pinned his police badge on him. Mm-hmm. And she said, you whispered to me, don't stick me with that. And then she said, remember, you're my favorite son.
And the last voice that we just heard there before the judge announced that they're taking a 15-minute break in this sentencing hearing, we saw Derek Chauvin himself get up, go to the microphone, stand next to his defense attorney, Eric Nelson. Derek Chauvin spoke for himself, saying not able to give a full statement today due to some other legal matters, because we also know that he faces some federal charges right now. But he said, I'd like to give my condolences to the Floyd family.
Yes. So, as you mentioned, this may be because he is facing the federal criminal civil rights charges in two separate cases, not only for this case, but there's another involving a separate incident. But so that he may have been advised by his counsel in his federal case not to go into great detail. But that was the first time we heard Derek Chauvin actually say anything to the family of George Floyd, though it was very brief.
Mm-hmm. And he said that in the future that there would be some more information that might, it wasn't really clear. He hinted that there's something new that they may discover that might bring them some solace, he said.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what he meant by that, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
We also heard before him Eric Nelson, the defense attorney. He said a couple things. He said that the public interest should not influence the sentence here, as he's speaking to Judge Cahill, who will make this decision. And he noted that Derek Chauvin has lived an honorable life, that he was respected by other Minneapolis police officers, and he urged the judge to follow the sentencing guidelines. And so, Brent, let's go back and talk about just the wide range of options the judge has here. The maximum sentence for a second-degree murder could be, he could be looking at 40 years.
Right. And as the Matthew Frank, Assistant Attorney General, had spoken in giving him basically his argument for the upward departure on the sentencing, it was just he went through those aggravating factors and talked about how, in a typical second-degree murder unintentional case, you don't have this type of cruelty. He explained how Derek Chauvin abused his position of authority as a police officer in this particular crime, and by this crime was committed in front of children. The two 17-year-old girls and a 9-year-old witnessed this 9-minute long, what they refer to as a torture and death.
And then another one of the aggravating factors to be considered here, the crime was committed by a group. And yes, again, that there was particular cruelty, children were present at the scene, and that Chauvin abused his position of authority. And we should also mention, too, when Matthew Frank, they're one of the prosecuting attorneys, one of our assistant attorney generals, he said that we want 360 months. So the prosecutors in the case have recommended to the judge in writing a 30-year sentence. That is Correct. What they're seeking. And notably, Matthew Frank said, quote, "This is a time for the criminal justice system to say we hear you."
Right.
And that really speaks to just how the nation has reacted to this case.
Right. They're very aware of the attention and the impact that this particular case has had on the world. As we all know, after May 25th of last year, Minneapolis became the focus of attention from around the country and around the world. As a reporter covering this, I remember getting phone calls from news stations in New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, who wanted to know more about this case. What was going on in Minneapolis that made this possible, that was the atmosphere that spawned this. So there's been so much attention paid, and the prosecutors are very well aware of that.
Again, we're monitoring live coverage of the sentencing hearing for Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who was convicted of murder in the case of George Floyd in May of 2020. The judge in the case says that we are on a break now until 2:45, and we presume when he returns, we'll find out what that sentence is. We've been listening to victim impact statements since about 1:30 when the hearing started, and it started with 4 victim impact statements, relatives of George Floyd, in a recorded message, a video message. We heard from his 7-year-old daughter, Gianna Floyd, a little girl who recalled memories of her dad helping her brush her teeth and having dinner, and talked about the fact that mean people took him away from her. But we also, while we wait for the hearing to resume, we want to play a recording of George Floyd's nephew, Brandon Williams. He delivered one of those victim impact statements from the family. And let's listen to what Brandon Williams, George Floyd's nephew, had to say.
On Monday, May 25th, 2020, George Perry Floyd Jr. was murdered by Derek Chauvin in a malicious and insidious display of hate and abuse of power. Chovin killed George. Not only did he kill George, but he also displayed a total lack of consideration for human life as he did so. You saw it, I saw it, and millions of people across this country and the globe witnessed the act of hate. A year and 1 month later, I stand there before you tasked with the duty of expressing how George's death has impacted me personally and the rest of our family. As I racked my brain and thought about what I could say today, I came to this conclusion. It is humanly impossible for me to stand here and convey or articulate the right words that would capture all that we are feeling and what we have felt over this period. So please bear with me as I attempt the impossible. The sudden murder of George has forever traumatized us. You may see us cry, but the full extent of our pain and trauma will never be seen with the naked eye. The heartbreak and hurt goes far beyond any number of tears we could ever cry. Words simply cannot express the pain, anguish, and suffering that our family and friends have endured since George's murder. It has been truly unimaginable, but not as nearly unimaginable as the defendant's decision to take the life of a human being with no regard for the effect it may have on others. Although Chauvin will be sentenced today and spend time in prison, he will have the luxury of seeing his family again, talking to them, and he will likely get to spend time with them upon his release. These are all luxuries that my young cousin Gianna was robbed of when Chauvin made the active decision to kill her father. There will be no more birthday parties, no graduations, holiday gatherings, or other family celebrations. The laughter, hugs, guidance, advice, sense of security, and those opportunities to simply say I love you are forever gone. They say time heals all, and while I generally believe that saying, it's challenging to do so given these unfathomable set of circumstances. Before I conclude, I must highlight a few things. George's murder, this trial, and everything in between has been tragic and devastating. Our family is forever broken, and one thing we cannot get back is George Floyd. It is the request of my family that the maximum penalty for the crime for which the defendant was convicted be imposed. On behalf of my family, friends, community, and supporters, I wish to express my sincerest gratitude for allowing us opportunities of expression.
Again, we're listening to live coverage of the sentencing hearing for Derek Chauvin. The judge announced that we're on a break until about 2:45. We've been listening to victim impact statements from family members of George Floyd. You just heard there from his nephew. And now we can give you a listen to what one of his brothers, Phalonis Floyd, had to say. He also spoke to the group, and, the family has talked about being traumatized and unable really to heal. Let's listen to George Floyd's brother, Phalonis.
I was a trucker, and immediately my life changed forever. I began to speak to the world for George from the United Nations, Africa, Canada, Japan, and so many other countries. Every day, I have begged for justice to be served, reliving the execution of George, while others begged and pleaded for Officer Chovin to simply just allow George to take a breath. I haven't had a real nice sleep because of the nightmares I constantly have hearing my brother beg and plead for his life over and over again. Even saying, "They're going to kill me. Please, officer," screaming for our mom. I have had to sit through each day of Officer Derek Chauvin's trial and watch the video of George dying for hours over and over again. For an entire year, I had to relive George being tortured to death every hour of the day, only taking naps and not knowing what a good night's sleep is anymore. I've been lifting my voice tirelessly every day so that George's death will not be in vain. Honorable Judge Peter Cahill, I thank you for allowing me to share this today. George's life mattered. So my family and I, most of all, my niece, Gianna. My niece, Gianna, she needs closure. I'm asking that you please find it suitable to give Officer Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, charge that he has been found guilty for. My family and I have been given a life sentence. We will never be able to get George back. Daddies are our daughter's first love. He would never be able to walk Gianna down the aisle at her wedding, attend those magical moments of her life like a daddy-daughter dance, sweet 16 party, seeing her out for prom graduations, and she would never be able to have any personal memories with her father. With a smirk on his face and children present, Officer Chauvin used excessive force and acted against his training. Chauvin had no regards for human life, George's life. I stand before you today asking you to please help us find closure by giving Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, making sure he does his time consecutively without the possibilities of parole, probation, or getting out early for good behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Again, that was a victim impact statement from the brother of George Floyd, Philonise Floyd, one of 4 family members who we heard from during this sentencing hearing. We are on a break right now for another maybe 3 minutes or so until 2:45. Judge Peter Cahill says that he will be back at 2:45 and will resume the hearing. And I want to make sure that our viewers know that as we wait for the sentencing of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, that we do know that there are news conferences that are scheduled to begin immediately after the sentencing, when we will hear from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, as well as from the family, George Floyd's family attorney Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton, who spoke at George Floyd's funeral and at several news conferences during the trial. And Brant Williams is here with me in the studio. And Brant, we should also note there was a new development this morning in the case. I'm told now we've gotten a 2-minute warning that they'll be back. But quickly, let's let people know about the fact that the judge denied the defense motion for a new trial in this case.
That's correct. Judge Cahill released that ruling earlier today, we became aware of. And as Judge Burke, former Hennepin County Judge Kevin Burke had mentioned earlier in the programming, that was not necessarily a surprise. It's part of the process after a criminal trial. You will see the defense attorney, if there's a judgment against their client, they will file a motion saying that this trial, there's something wrong with it, as Eric Nelson had filed, saying that there were errors made by the trial court, and ask for a new trial. And that's when today Judge Cahill issued his ruling that he was not going to allow that. He said there was not enough of a case made there that Mr. Chauvin's constitutional rights were denied him having a fair trial. So what we can expect likely is then an appeal of that decision made by Judge Cahill.
And reviewing again the state guidelines recommend that Chauvin be sentenced to approximately 12 and a half years in prison. But the judge has ruled that there were those aggravating factors that could warrant a much harsher sentence. Prosecutors have asked for 30 years, while Chauvin's attorney says that he should only receive probation. And we do know also that Derek Chauvin is the first white police officer in the state to be convicted of killing a black man while on duty. Muhammad Noor was the first to be found guilty in a police killing, and he is serving right now a sentence of 12 and a half years for the killing of Justine Ruszczyk.
Right.
What more can we say just about just the national impact, the fact that everybody right now, and the way we're sort of waiting for a verdict in the trial, is probably watching and waiting for sentencing?
Well, I should also mention, Angela, that due to some of the reporting of our colleague John Collins, who put together basically a list of things that we should all keep in mind as we're observing the sentencing today, mentioning that other police officers who have been convicted of on-duty killings, that there's researcher at Bowling Green State University, a professor named Philip Stinson, who is kind of been keeping track of these. And according to his data, there's an average of about 21.7 years of an average sentence for on-duty officers who have been convicted of murder. But he said the median sentence is 15 years. So, again, I don't think he would be surprised if he saw Derek Chauvin get in that 15 to 20-year range. But, again, we don't know. Judge Cahill could go higher. He could go a little lower.
Again, we've been listening to victim impact statements, and Derek Chauvin himself spoke of, as well as his mother, Carolyn Palenti. We heard her speak, and, just such pain for both of these families.
Right. That's something that I think that I've covered trials before, and the families of the person who is convicted have another role to play in the criminal justice system. And yes, there's so much attention paid to the victim, the family of the victims, and rightly so. There's also another dimension that usually does not get that much attention. We had not heard from anybody from Chauvin's family throughout this trial. We understand that there was, towards the end of the criminal trial, there was a woman sitting in the courtroom in Chauvin's corner, but we did not hear anything from this person or other members of Chauvin's family to speak out. They weren't holding press conferences. They weren't standing up for him throughout this. But as Carolyn Palenti mentioned, Chauvin's mother, she said, even though I had not spoken out, I have been supporting you this whole time.
And, let's revisit, too, what's happening at the Hennepin County Courthouse today. I think earlier we mentioned the fact that whole building is closed to the public today, with the exception of county staff and the folks who are there for the sentencing hearing. There's no activity there. But we also know that they have not put up any barriers or any of the type of security that we saw during the trial, particularly when we were waiting for the verdict.
That's correct. During the trial, the Hennepin County Government Center was completely barred off. It was like a bit of a fortress. I attended a couple of the in-courtroom hearings during the trial and before the trial, and I had to go through a checkpoint where there were armed National Guardsmen. There's not the same presence there today, though.
All right. Well, we were told we'd be back at 2:45, but that isn't happening right now. We're standing by. And while we stand by, let's talk to our friend, retired Judge Kevin Burke, recently retired from Hennepin County District Court, where this trial was held. And Judge Burke, are you there? Good afternoon to you again.
Yep, I'm back.
So what do you think? What's going on right now? What does a judge do, or what was a judge thinking in these last minutes before announcing a sentence?
Well, my suspicion is that Judge Cahill has some prepared remarks. You would not go in and wing this. There's a technical thing that he referenced, which is he needs to fill out a sentencing order, and it's a form that's part of the official record that really represents the sentence. And so there's a certain amount of time just to fill out the form as to what the sentence is. And then I think the most important thing is that he reflects on what he just heard. Although most of what he heard would have been referenced in the pre-sentence investigation, still it can have an impact. So the impact of Mr. Chauvin's mother, the impact of George Floyd's daughter, the 7-year-old who spoke. Those things are part of the equation in trying to come up with what you think is particularly fair. Eric Nelson's comments about if you look at the sentencing guidelines, why they exist, and where the departures have been, you would reflect on that.
And so the judge, he's already received, I guess, written statements or his recommendations or briefs from these attorneys on both sides. So he's already had a lot of time to think about this.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just that emotional pull of actually hearing.
Well, it certainly is emotional, but the other thing is this is an awesome responsibility. And so being careful, reflecting now, am I really comfortable with this? Is you don't get to undo this if you're a judge. You can't wake up tomorrow or next week or next summer and say, I made a mistake. So the idea that you reflect on what you're doing and you have to understand is it's singularly your responsibility. You can ask colleagues advice, but in the end, the sentencing judge is the one who's got to make those decisions. And so reflecting on that.
Thank you all. We're back in session and on the record. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for being here and for providing the input you did. Not just the people who were in the courtroom here, but also those who provided written statements, both from the Floyd family and the defendant's family. I've read all the impact statements that were submitted earlier and listened carefully to all the input here today. And it is truly appreciated that you took the time to stay with this case and to provide me with input. I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation and carefully considered all the facts of the case and the law, but my comments are actually going to be very brief because most of it's going to be in writing. I have a 22-page memorandum that is going to be attached to the sentencing order. And why am I doing it in writing? To emphasize the fact that determining the appropriate sentence in any case, and in this case, is a legal analysis. It's applying the rule of law to the facts of an individual and specific case. And that is why, as opposed to trying to being profound here on the record, I prefer that you read the legal analysis that explains how I determined the sentence in this case. What the case is, or what the sentence is not based on, is emotion or sympathy. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. You have our sympathies. And I acknowledge and hear the pain that you are feeling. I acknowledge the pain not only of those in this courtroom, but the Floyd family who are outside this courtroom and other members of the community. It has been painful throughout Hennepin County, throughout the state of Minnesota, and even the country. But most importantly, we need to recognize the pain of the Floyd family. I'm not going to attempt to be profound or clever because it's not the appropriate time. I'm not basing my sentence also on public opinion. I'm not basing it on any attempt to send any messages. A trial court judge, the job of a trial court judge is to apply the law to specific facts and to deal with individual cases. And so, Mr. Chovin, as to count 1, based on the verdict of the jury finding you guilty of unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony under Minnesota Statute 609.19 subdivision 2 paren 1, it is the judgment of the court that you now stand convicted of that offense. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 60904, counts 2 and 3 will remain unadjudicated as they are lesser offenses of count 1. As sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd. You are granted credit for 199 days already served. Pay the mandatory surcharge of $78 to be paid from prison wages. You're prohibited from possessing firearms, ammunition, or explosives for the remainder of your life. Provide a DNA sample as required by law. Register as a predatory offender as required by law. And you will receive a copy of the order and also the attached memorandum explaining the court's analysis. Anything further from the state?
If this needs to be said, we just ask that it be executed forthwith.
Defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff to be transported back to the DOC or whichever custody is currently holding him. Anything from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Officer Derek Chauvin, the man who was found guilty in the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis in May of 2020. We just heard the sentence announced by Judge Peter Cahill. He announced the sentence is 270 months, which comes out to about 22 and a half years. Again, 22 and a half years is the sentence. And he said that this is 10 years in addition to the recommended 150 months. So again, we were talking about the aggravating factors in this case, and this is why we saw the judge, I guess, add additional years to what he could have sentenced Derek Chauvin to. And as I was watching the video feed, because there are cameras in the courtroom, once again, very similar. Derek Chauvin is wearing a face mask. You really did not see much of a reaction. He was facing the judge and shortly thereafter stood up and left the room.
Right. Yeah, it was hard to tell as during the trial as well as we would watch to see if there was any type of emotion coming from Derek Chauvin during all the moments of the trial. I think the most emotion that I saw out of Derek Chauvin was actually when he was watching his mother talk about him. It appeared that he perhaps teared up, but as Judge Cahill announced a 270-month sentence, it didn't look like there was much outward that we could see.
Right. So the maximum sentence, 40 years. The defense attorneys were asking for no time in prison for probation, and we've landed there at 22 and a half years. Again, it looks like the judge did go with those 4 aggravating factors, particular cruelty. The murder took place in the presence of children.
Yeah, the abuse of authority. You mentioned that.
As we kind of take this news in, again, live coverage of the sentencing hearing of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer convicted in murdering George Floyd. Judge Peter Cahill just announced the sentence of 22 and a half years. And I'm here in the studio. I'm Angela Davis here with Brant Williams, a Minneapolis reporter and editor for many years here at NPR. But let's also get some legal analysis here. We do have an attorney on the line. I want to bring in now attorney Angie Porter. And Angie is a law and Africana Studies professor at Georgetown University there in D.C., but she's also a former vice president of the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers and has been watching the Derek Chauvin trial very closely. Angie, are you there on the line?
I am here. Thanks, Angela, for having me.
Sure. So you're watching this video feed as well. And what are your thoughts about this sentence of 22 and a half years for Derek Chauvin?
So it was slightly over what I personally predicted. I thought there would be a sentence imposed between 15 and 20 years. I think it's sort of what a lot of analysts expected, given the court showing what it considered to be in play, which were those aggravating factors that you mentioned. So I think not a big surprise. I think it's important for the public to know on the practical end that Chauvin, if he were to carry out this sentence, would be in prison for 15 years and would serve the remainder of that sentence on supervised release out in the community. However, we should put a little caveat that it is very likely Chauvin will appeal his sentence. I think that that's just sort of a matter of course for most defendants. And there will be arguments about his underlying conviction on appeal as well. So we'll have to, again, wait and see.
Chauvin's defense attorney, Eric Nelson, has expressed concern about Derek Chauvin's safety in prison. And so what do we know about the reasons that convicted law enforcement officers should be worried about their safety if they are indeed incarcerated?
Well, I think they are sort of what you would expect. There, in our prison system, is a disproportionate reality. Most inmates are Black and brown people who have really suffered the brunt of white supremacist systems in this country, including policing. And so police, whether or not they hold those ideologies, are responsible for many imprisoned being where they are. And so I definitely think it's predictable that there will be some feelings of resentment against Derek Chauvin simply because he's a police officer. But when you layer on the global import of this case and the heinous nature of this crime, that also plays into whatever dynamic in whatever environment he finds himself in, whether that's in prison or out of prison.
And Angie, I want to remind our listeners, we are listening you have been listening to live coverage of the sentencing hearing for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Judge Peter Cahill just announced that sentence of 22 and a half years. We are now waiting for the start of a couple of news conferences. That first one is a news conference scheduled to take place immediately after the hearing. We're expecting to hear in the next couple of minutes here from Attorney General Keith Ellison, the lead prosecutor in this case. And then we're also going to be hearing from family members of George Floyd, as well as the family's attorney, Ben Crump, and the Reverend Al Sharpton, who spoke at George Floyd's funeral. And so we're continuing to talk to Angie here, as well as reporter Brant Williams, about this sentence that we've all been waiting for. And so, Angie, I'm curious, what do you think about the implications of this sentence? I mean, everyone has been watching this case nationally, globally, but does this sentence of 22 and a half years, does it set some type of precedent?
I would hope so. I really hope the precedent is set in that police officers, and more expansively, people who extinguish Black life in this nation are held to account through the court system. The sentence being a part of that accountability process. So I'm hoping that that sets a precedent. On the more, I guess, pessimistic side, Angela, I do feel that this will also dredge up some serious resentment, hopefully not retaliatory in nature, but resentment from those in the country who feel that they've been victimized somehow by the simple carrying out of justice here.
Right.
I'm hoping that that doesn't happen.
Angie, this is Brant Williams. Good to talk to you again.
Hi, Brant.
Follow up on the question. Yeah. Eric Nelson mentioned that he felt like whatever sentence was going to come down would spark some dissent on both sides. And it sounds like you were kind of touching on that as well, because he mentioned that there will likely be some people who will see the sentence as draconian. What did you make of that?
I just thought that was just total fluff. It doesn't take into account the false equivalency in that narrative. We know that we live in a country and a justice system that suffers from serious disproportionalities when it comes to people of color, when it comes to Black and brown defendants. And so this is not draconian if we look to what's been happening under our nose for the inception of the system. But now that it has happened to someone who looks like Derek Chauvin, there is that feeling out there of victimization. And that really needs to be squarely addressed. That rhetoric of on both sides, as we have seen in the past several years in this country, it is a false one, that it does not consider all of the circumstances and the history that's led us to this point. So I really did think that that was pure fluff, but it is the narrative that Eric Nelson has used throughout this trial, and it is the narrative that will be used on appeal and as we talk about this trial moving forward.
Again, we now know the sentence for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd is 22 and a half years. State guidelines recommended Chauvin be sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison, but the judge ruled that there were aggravating factors to be considered, and it warranted a harsher sentence, and that is what we saw, 22 and a half years. Prosecutors had asked for 30 years, while Chauvin's attorney says that he should have only received probation. Talking right now with Angie Porter, who is a former vice president of the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers and is now there at Georgetown University in D.C. And Angie, one of the comments that I wrote down from Matthew Frank, one of the prosecutors in the case during the victim impact statements, he said that looking at the history of the criminal justice system, he said that this is the time for the criminal justice system to say, "We hear you." And he was referring to other families who have gone through what George Floyd his family went through.
I think that was a poignant point that he made. I think he was right. He was trying to center the judge's focus on the victims of what happened, however you want to draw that. And I think the implication was, Judge Cahill, draw that broadly. Think about the Floyd family. Think about this community, Minneapolis, which we all belong to. I know I'm out on the East Coast now, but was there during that entire time. And think about the country. He said that without saying that. So I really did think that was a salient point. However, Judge Cahill has sat through many sentencing hearings. Many judges have. That's what judges do. And sentencing hearings happen all the time. And so this was nothing new from the judge's perspective. Hearing that volley of emphasis from the prosecution team to the defense team, this is all a normal, natural part of the process. And so as I was listening to that, I was also thinking, Judge Cahill isn't rattled by this. He's not swayed by this. He is making his decision in a cool manner. And most of that decision was probably made before 1:30 p.m. today.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm not going to talk about this a whole lot. This is not the time to be clever. I have a 22-page, brief with commentary on this, and here's the sentence of 22 and a half years. And we also, we have to remember, too, that we are still waiting for the trial of the other 3 Minneapolis police officers who were there with Derek Chauvin on May 25th of 2020 when he pressed his knee down on George Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes. They're Thomas Lane, J. Alexander King, and Tu Tao. Brant, remind us when their trial is taking place, and what are they charged with? Tell us again.
Right. Well, they were originally scheduled to go on trial in August, but those trials have been pushed into next year, into March, and they've been charged with aiding and abetting in Chauvin's crimes. So we'll see. And there's also the federal cases as well that are hanging over all of them. So it's yet to be seen. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to affect their counsel's calculations on perhaps trying to reach some type of settlement. I'd be interested in hearing Professor Porter's opinion of that as well. But to me, I'm not exactly sure. But I'm not a lawyer.
So, Angie, what do you think? I mean, obviously, these 3 other officers and their attorneys, they're watching what happens to Derek Chauvin.
Absolutely. Settlement negotiations are not something that the public is privy to, but they do happen and they are ongoing. And I'm willing to bet that the prosecution team, looking forward to those trials, both on the federal and state side, are thinking what prosecution teams usually think about. They're thinking about judicial resources. They're thinking about their own resources. They're thinking about the risks of trial, jury selection. Nothing is guaranteed once you get a jury in the courtroom. And so they, of course, are going to be thinking about plea negotiations. And they are also watching this to decide how that can change the tone and tenor of their negotiations. They now have this hefty sentence to point to when bargaining with those defendants.
Right. And Professor,
on the defense side, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you on that point. Remember, Derek Chauvin, in his brief remarks, said something is a bit cryptic it sounded to me saying that there was going to be something, developments
revealed to the family
that may help bring them some peace. What did you make of that? Is there a tell there somewhere that we should be aware of?
Oh, that jumped out at me. And I honestly didn't know what to make of that. On the one extreme guest side, it could mean he's showing his hand about a plea negotiation. However, I feel like that's a little far-fetched. I think that the posture of this case shows that there will be an appeal, and that's just not really consistent with a plea in the other case, but we'll have to see. Another thought I had was maybe there will be some sort of charitable donation in his name after all the proceedings are done, or maybe letters will be sent to the family, or there will be some sort of communication made in the realm of healing and restorative justice that we might just not be privy to. But the thought is out there that perhaps that does suggest something about plea bargaining.
Right.
I want to remind our listeners we are interrupting our regular programming because we have been bringing live coverage of the sentencing hearing for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Judge Peter Cahill has announced the sentence.
If you guys just push it, yeah.
So we're going to stand it just back there like before. Yeah, just sort of like, around.
Right there, right by here. Hey, Derek.
Except you all need to come on. I had to go to the chair. I have too much weight. You don't have more weight than me. You don't know. You ready? Everybody ready? Gather in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Ellison. I'm the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. And on behalf of the prosecution team, we want to thank the Floyd family, Brandon Williams, Terrence Floyd, Philanese Floyd, and Gigi, who offered their testimony to the court and gave their heartfelt feelings about the impact of this horrific crime on their family. We heard for the first time from George Floyd's 6-year-old daughter. What a delightful, beautiful child. And my heart really is with the entire Floyd family as they figure out how to explain to her what happened as she grows up. The sentence that the court just imposed on Derek Chauvin, 270 months or 22 and a half years, is one of the longest a former police officer has ever received for an unlawful use of deadly force. Like the conviction of Derek Chauvin 2 months ago, today's sentencing is not justice, but it is another moment of real accountability on the road to justice. It's difficult to see anyone lose their freedom, but seeing somebody lose their life through torture over 9.5 minutes is incomparably worse. Those minutes and seconds are inerasably seared into the minds of people across the world who watched George Floyd die. Above all, the heroic people who stopped and bore witness to George Floyd's suffering and torture, who came forward a year later to testify about what they saw, and to the Floyd family members themselves and their counsel, Ben Crump, Tony Romanucci, we say thank you. The lives of everyone who saw what happened to George Floyd are forever changed. My hope for Derek Chauvin is that he uses his long sentence to reflect on the choices that he made on May 25th, 2020. My hope is that he will find it within himself to acknowledge the impact of his choices on George Floyd, his family, his fellow police officers, and the world. My hope is that he takes the time to learn something about the man whose life he took and about the movement that rose up to call for justice in the wake of George Floyd's torture and death. Today is also an important moment for our country. The outcome of this case is critically important, but by itself, it's not enough. My hope for our country is that this moment gives us pause and allows us to rededicate ourselves to the real societal change that will move us much further along the road to justice. I'm not talking about the kind of change that takes decades. I'm talking about real change, concrete change that real people can do now. I'm talking to lawmakers. At this historic moment, there is so much legislation around the country. In city councils, county boards, state legislatures, and Congress that is still waiting to be passed. If these bills were passed, they would make the deaths at the hands of law enforcement officers less likely, would improve police-community relations, would restore trust and therefore cooperation, improve the lives of officers who want to protect and serve, and make everyone safer. Every one of these bills at every level of government is critical for helping our families, our law enforcement officers, communities, and the country heal. Above all, Congress has still not passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. I call on leaders and members of Congress to pass the best and strongest version of this bill that can be passed, and to pass it now. President Biden called on the Congress to pass this bill. It must be passed. Lives are depending upon it. It's just that simple. I'm speaking now to law enforcement leaders. At this historic moment, law enforcement leaders are in a position to finally put in place policy, training, mechanisms, and accountability that can build a police department that people can really trust and rely on. And the elected leaders that they answer to must support and empower these law enforcement leaders to do it. Where there is distrust between community and police, there is less cooperation between community and police. And at a moment where violent crime is spiking across the nation in major cities, we simply cannot afford the distrust. The schism leaves us all a little less safe. But trust and cooperation must be earned. You cannot clean a dirty wound. By bringing accountability in law enforcement, you actually promote public safety. I say to those law enforcement leaders, make no mistake, this is something your officers are asking for. In the aftermath of George Floyd's death, 14 Minneapolis Police Department officers signed an open letter condemning Derek Chauvin's actions and embracing the call for reform and change. These 14 officers don't only speak for themselves, they speak for hundreds across the country. These officers and ones like them want you to support officers who treat everyone with dignity and respect. They want you to support officers who are taking risks to speak up and demand that we do better. They want you to hold their colleagues accountable who refuse to serve communities with dignity and respect. Why do officers want accountability? Well, think of the 9-year-old girl wearing a t-shirt that said love across the front, who witnessed George Floyd's murder, and how she will feel 20 years from now as she may be speaking to her own children about whether to trust law enforcement. The damage that Derek Floyd's crime inflicted upon the reputation of officers is undermining the ability for people to trust, and that is very tragic. It's not fair to judge all police officers by Derek Chauvin's actions, but some people inevitably will generalize unless there is true accountability. You just can't heal a dirty wound, and when there's little trust, sadly, there's little safety. When law enforcement leaders take clear steps to build in accountability and prioritize wellness for their officers, they will have the officers' respect, trust between officers and the people they are dedicated to protecting and serving. Let me speak to prosecutors. We believe, and we state and declare, that no one is above the law and no one is beneath it. A police officer is not above the law, and George Floyd certainly is not beneath the law. When, after a thorough review, prosecutors believe that they have probable cause that anyone, including someone operating with the authority of law and law enforcement, has violated the law, our prosecutors must be vigorous, visible, and swift. I'm speaking to community now. We need every community member to continue the call for real reform and meaningful change. Peacefully, constructively, but clearly. This is a moment for change, and your call for it is making it happen. This means everyone who wants to live in a society with dignity and respect as core values, everyone who wants to be safe in their homes and on the street, everyone who wants to get the help that they need, everyone who wants their loved ones to get home safely. This is what we need to do. What will happen if we don't do it? We will slip deeper into a century-long cycle of inaction. We can and we must make another choice. The choice to break the old paradigm and end the cycle of inaction, the choice to act for accountability and justice, the choice to transform ourselves and our country. For the sake of all the lives that have been lost, for the sake of the terrible sacrifices that too many families like the Floyds have had to make, and for the sake of the many officers who strive to serve and protect with dignity and honor and high standards, and for the sake of the community. Time is up. It's time to act. We're counting on you. We're counting on each other. Finally, I want to thank this extraordinary team of prosecutors. It has been my deepest honor to work with you. You all are the best, and I'm honored to be your colleague. I want to send another strong signal of love and friendship to the Floyd family, who have done so much to uphold the dignity of our community. I want to thank the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and Mike Freeman, who have been side by side with us and have done such a good job, and we appreciate their work. And I want to thank the witnesses who courageously stepped forward for George Floyd on May 25th at risk to themselves and came back a year later to testify about what they saw. And lastly, I want to thank the community for making the call for justice. That's it. Thank you very much.
Of the worst brutality that has ever happened in this country, not only by one officer, but by 4 officers. As we waited patiently, not that long ago for this verdict of guilty, 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 right now we are reacting to 22 and a half years. The question that many of us have today is, show me a crime more heinous than what Derek Chauvin has done. Show me a crime where someone sits on the back of a human being, does not let him breathe for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Show me a crime where an individual who works for the government, who is trained, who has served and has been in that office for a long time, to commit that kind of murder on broad daylight while children watched, while community members watched, while firefighters, off-duty firefighters begged to intervene. This was the worst murder by an officer that we know of today. And this judge had an opportunity to show that the law allows him to bring back 30 years. Instead, he brought back what is comfortable for white people in this country. He brought back something that will make many Americans say, that should be enough. Well, if you go into the prison system in this country, there are black people who have gone into prison for far less and who have been in prison for crimes that are much less, for longer sentences. Why did Derek Chauvin get this treatment, where the law now had to be exercised for him to find a middle ground? Where was the middle ground for George Floyd when he begged for his life? Where was the middle ground for the countless of lives that many of you never covered, never cared for, that have been killed in darkness all over this country? We are saddened today to know that the justice system is not full for us. It is partial for us. And we do not accept partial justice in this country. And black people in this country need to wake up, because we are seeing this everywhere. And today, the most noted case, the most watched case, the most horrifying case got a mediocre sentence.
Yes, it did.
And we are not happy.
That's right.
But we are also not surprised. This is a country that has a legacy of genocide against Native Americans and the continued enslavement of African Americans through mass incarceration, among other things. We now ask for the federal government, in their case, to bring forth swifter justice. Because this state, for many of you who came in here today, flying into Minneapolis, flying into this state, I want you to know this is one of the most racist states in the Union. The racism in this country is different in different parts. But up here in Minnesota, the racism here comes with a smile. It comes with a gift. The racism here is problematic. And so we demand justice for George Floyd, and we will not end that, because we know justice for George Floyd is really justice for all the families. And we will not stop fighting. We will not stop caring, because we know the justice system in this country has to be full for all Americans, not partial.
Hey, back up, back up.
Come back if the family's finished.
That's fine. I just have to get my walker.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
We'll have the family now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, I just have to.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I need to move.
Is it staying?
I'm not with the media.
We don't need it.
Okay.
Do you want it?
No, I was wondering because I was going to put this on there for something.
We want it? Is it good?
I don't think anybody.
We don't want it. Okay. Attorney Crab.
Jaylani, do you need that?
No.
It's New
Ooh, I'm the sooner. Thanks. You better get some water before you pass out.
Let's go.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get underway. My name is Jennifer McGuffin. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the law firm of Romanucci and Blandon. We are going to hear from Reverend Al Sharpton, who will start us in prayer, followed by the legal team, Attorney Ben Crump, Attorney Antonio Romanucci, Jeff Storms, Chris Stewart. And then we will hear from a few members of the family. If you could please hold your questions, let them get through what they need to say. Thank you so much.
As we prepare to pray, family of Jacob Blake is with us, and the family of Dante Wright is with us. This verdict and this sentencing is the longest sentence we've seen, but it is not justice, because George Floyd is in a grave tonight, even though Chovin will be in jail. So let us not feel that we're here to celebrate, because justice would have been George Floyd never have been killed. Justice would have been the maximum. We got more than we thought, only because we have been disappointed so many times before. 22 and a half years is longer than we've ever got, but shorter than what we should have gotten in the past. let us remember a man lost his life. This is not a prayer of celebration. It's a prayer to thank God for giving the strength to this family and those activists that stayed in the streets to make sure this court had to do what was right. Let me repeat for those in the back, because those are the ones that marched, that this is the longest sentence they've ever given, but it is not justice. Justice is George Floyd would be alive. Amen. Justice is that they would have been doing this. Had they done sentences like this before, maybe Chauvin would not have thought he would have gotten away with it. That's right. So let us remember the people that you castigated and attacked that marched in Minneapolis and that we marched all over this country that wouldn't stop. And we're not going to stop. One sentence does not solve a criminal justice problem. The United States Senate must show the same courage this jury showed and hold police accountable for murder and make them pay in the court of law maximum for murder. Not a token, not a donation, but full accountability for the actions that you did. Let us pray. Dear God, we come to the same spot we bowed at the beginning of the trial, asking you to give this family strength and give them grace. And you brought us now to the end of this particular proceeding. They will say it is more time than any time in history, but we will say that history has been long underserving its citizens. Yes. And we humbly thank you for giving this family the strength to stand where other families didn't even get a court date. Yes. We remember Eric Garner today. Yes. We remember Michael Brown. Yes. We remember Jacob Blake, who is still with us. We remember Tamir Rice on his birthday. 19 years old would have been today. We remember Breonna Taylor. Yes. They never got a court date. Never. We did get a court date, a conviction, and some time. Amen. Some will say that's progress. I will say, as Malcolm X said, if you have a knife in my back 6 inches, to take out 4 inches is progress, but I still have 2 inches of knife in my back. The knife is still in our back as long as these unresolved cases are there. And the Floyd family and those of us in the civil rights community and the activist community will not stop until justice becomes a matter of federal law and no longer a news story, but the story that we know will follow. Touch the U.S. Senate to see that they must make law so that we will not have little children like George's daughter had to give a judge a statement about the value of a daddy, but they understand that all of your children matter. Yes, black lives matter because you made us all. And we'll be careful to be loyal, and we'll be careful to live up to the calling you've placed on the lives of those that serve, and careful to give your name the praise. These blessings we ask in your name. Amen. Amen. Let me bring on now. It's been a long journey, and this is not the end. This is just one stop on the highway toward full justice. None has been more courageous. None has been more consistent. One has not been more unselfish than the Attorney General of Black America, who has stood with this family from day one, came even when the cameras weren't there, and has stayed with the family and other families. Let us bring, before we bring members of the family, Attorney Ben Crump.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Reverend Al Sharpton, for leading this family and this country in prayer as we continue to struggle to make the words of liberty and justice for all real in America. I stand here with a great legal team standing firmly with the family of George Floyd. That is Attorney Chris Stewart and Attorney Justin Miller from Atlanta, Georgia, Attorney Tony Romanucci from Chicago, Illinois, and Attorney Jeff Storms from right here in Minneapolis. And at present, we have the brothers of George Floyd, Philonise Floyd, Terrence Floyd, and Rodney Floyd, as well as Brandon Williams. We have his cousins, Sharita Tate and Tara Brown. And we know at home praying we have his sisters, Bridget Floyd, Jaja Floyd, and Latanya Floyd, and certainly his beautiful daughter, Chris tells me, is looking, smiling, saying that her daddy changed the world, and he will talk more about that later. And we want to acknowledge all his family. We want to acknowledge all of the people who use their voice to say his name. Say his name. Say his name. Say his name. Today represents an opportunity to be a turning point in America. This is the longest sentence that a police officer has ever been sentenced to in the history of the state of Minnesota. But this should not be the exception when a black person is killed by brutality by police. It should be the norm. And so when we think about real justice would be, Silky, that George Floyd would still be here with his family. So what we got today was some measure of accountability. And we understand that there are still federal charges pending. So as his brothers and his family ask for the maximum, we're still holding out for the maximum.
That's right.
We have to remember real justice in America will be black men and black women and people of color will not have to fear being killed by the police just because the color of their skin. That would be real justice. So we thank most of all the millions of Americans who raised their voice. You all raised your voices, and because you raised your voices, that is why we got the guilty conviction, and that is why we got the longest sentence in the state of Minnesota history. So on behalf of the Floyd family, we want to say thank you to millions of Americans who all said, until we get justice for George Floyd, until we get accountability for George Floyd, none of us can breathe. We can breathe just a little easier today. And we thank you for that.
We got your back.
We got your back. Thank you all. And I will say this. We got accountability on the civil side, thanks to the leadership of the city leaders in Minnesota. We now have gotten some accountability in the criminal level. But we need accountability on the policy level. So we say to the United States Senate, pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act immediately. 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 At this time, I give you one of the finest attorneys in the United States of America. I have had the pleasure of being with a team of lawyers, Reverend Al, who are second to none. And each of them work tirelessly day and night from every corner of America, working on behalf of George Floyd's family. And there is no way we could get to this point where we're at on this journey to justice without all our brothers and sisters, Bhavani Ravindran, Madeline Simmons, Michelle Godot, all of those, Scott Peters, all of them who are working, Scott Madison, they allowed us to come out front to be with the family today, but they are not forgotten. And I know my brother in the bar who just did wonderful things in Louisiana with Alton Sterling, Chris Stewart, appreciates each and every one of the lawyers on our team. At this time, you're going to hear from Attorney Chris Stewart and Attorney Justin Miller.
First, let me start by saying Roxy and Gianna couldn't be here, but right now, Gianna is actually watching. She's watching live. So let me tell you, Gianna, you've done two things in this case. You started by saying, my daddy changed the world.
Yes.
I want you to know you changed the world.
That's hard.
Because today, that statement that you gave was not just powerful, but it was prophetic. You told us that his spirit is still here.
That's right.
And people that are doubting, people that are looking at these monuments coming up and the statues coming up of George Floyd and not understanding, you aren't understanding that his spirit is changing things. It doesn't matter who the man was. It matters who he is now.
Yes.
There are conversations happening between black and white that never would have happened before about policing. There are conversations happening between senators that we are pushing and urging to stand up for what you believe in. If you believe in law and order and change, then you will pass this bill because it protects everyone. Nelson Mandela once said, if you change what you believe depending on who you're talking to, you are not fit to lead.
That's right. Amen.
So we are looking for leadership. We are looking for the spirit of George Floyd, which is in every single person now. We are getting off the sidelines and realizing that if you critique policing, it doesn't mean you hate every cop. It means you want the bad cops gone.
That's right. Yes.
And we only will change things by leaving the sidelines and coming together in the middle, no matter what color you are. And that is the spirit of George Floyd. And yes, Gianna has changed the world. It's been an honor and a privilege standing up for this family. It's just been an honor.
First and foremost, I would like to say to the family, my condolences, my prayers from my family and from everyone in Atlanta, from Scott Masterson, Madeline Simmons, Lewis Brisbois Law Firm, who put in a lot of work to help get us to the point we are today. Thank you to the family. I know that Mr. Chauvin's mother didn't have any words for the family, but we do, and I know you guys do. So to the family, I say my condolences, and I'm sorry, and we love you, because this is what it's about first and foremost, love. Second thing I'll say is this: until things like this are not national news, we haven't made it. We're still in the same place that we were 20 years ago and 30 years ago. We are all here talking about something that everybody sitting right here knew what should have happened.
That's right. Yes.
We knew from day one he murdered George Floyd.
Yes.
We all saw it.
Amen.
But we had to go through this for a year to get to this point where this family can have some modicum, some amount of closure. A year. So I'll say this: until black and brown people in this country can get closure, can depend on the justice system, can know that when someone murders somebody in broad daylight, that they're going to be held accountable, we got a lot of work to do. And I will say to all you people, all you activists, all you people who are fighting from day one, keep working, keep pushing, keep fighting. Keep fighting. Because we have a lot of work to do in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Brookline, Minnesota, Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, I'm sorry, and in New York City, and in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and in North Carolina, and in Los Angeles, California, in Texas and Chicago. We have work to do. So keep pushing. This is a victory, and we're going to celebrate it as a victory. But it's one small step, and we have a lot more to go. So thank you guys for being with us through all of this. Thank you guys for loving this family. And pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. ASAP.
Amen. And now, before we get to the family, some great lawyers from Chicago, Illinois, one of the best civil rights lawyers in America, and a great lawyer who hails right here in Minnesota. I mean, without him giving us the lay of the land, there is no way we would have been able to achieve what we have accomplished. Attorney Antonio Romanucci and Attorney Jeff Storms.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Romanucci. What we saw today was the graph intersected, the perfect apex now between civil justice and criminal justice. What we now have today, we have proof that Black lives matter, that they are valuable, and that when you violate policies, you're going to pay, and you're going to pay a lot of money. And when you violate the law, you're going to get prosecuted, and you're going to go to jail, and you're going to go to jail for a long time. And those two lines cross today, and George Floyd now equals justice on both civil and criminal. But the job isn't over. It's not over until we go state to state. Reverend Al, Ben, you all said it so eloquently. We must have the George Floyd police reforming bill passed. Amen. If that doesn't get passed, our justice could fall. The graph could fall. We need justice all over America. We want justice for George Floyd, the Floyd family. We continue to love you. We always will. We'll always be a part of your lives. But there are so many other families that are here today that are also suffering and require that same justice, civil and criminal. That's what matters most. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Not a lot to say that hasn't been said, but as the local Minnesota lawyer, I just want us to remember that we need all of you. We need the media, we need the activists, because the second we turn around and leave, we have to go back and ask ourselves, how do we get more justice for George Floyd? How do we get justice for Dante Wright? How do we get justice for Winston Smith? How do we get justice for the many families here who are regularly fought for on behalf by people like Tashira Garraway and her group, Nakima Levy Armstrong and her group, and without all of you, we don't have the energy for that fight right here. We need you all to keep turning out, and we appreciate it because it's allowed the Floyd family to get the most historic justice we've ever seen, but it's not enough.
Amen.
Thank you.
Not enough.
Don't forget Dalal Eid.
Dalal Eid.
Dalal Eid. And as we get ready to bring up the Floyd family, I would be remiss if Brandon, as we heard the sentence, leaned in and whispered in my ear. I got a text from Breonna Taylor's mother congratulating us on getting some justice, the justice that she never got. That's right. And I have to tell you, Reverend Al, as Derek Chauvin's mother was standing up there making her comments, I thought of Tamika Palmer, Breonna Taylor's mother. And so it's not enough until we get justice for all of our people who have been killed unjustly. I think Breonna Taylor's with us. Right now, we're going to have you hear from some of the Floyd family members. You've come to know him. He has been speaking at the U.S. Congress, to the United Nations and everywhere, saying that we demand justice for my big brother George Floyd. He sounds like a politician, Reverend Al. Mr. Philonise Floyd. Got my vote. Keep right.
I got a lot of emotions going through my head right now, but I just find it profound that I felt that I begged for justice for my brother, some type of accountability. The treatment that I thought that everybody should receive, it's just life, you know. You can't get that back. We all live together in this world, and we all want to be able to work together in this world. You have good police officers and you have bad ones. The fact that you shouldn't have to sort them out. The community that I grew up in, it was a lot of African American people. But the fact that Minnesota has a greater amount of Caucasian people, I still think that everybody should be the same. Everybody should be neutral. Everybody should want to make a difference and make sure that people, when they come to Minnesota, they don't think about George Floyd. They should be able to think about how great Minnesota is. Not thinking about Philando Castile. You know, his mother is still fighting. Thinking about Dante Wright. Many families I had to console. You think about Anthony McClain. He was killed. All of these people were shot in the back, most of them. The fact that I'm here and I'm still standing, and over a year later, I'm still speaking and I'm speaking out. Times are hard. I have a family, we wake up every day and we don't see my brother. Empty seats all around the house he would have been in. The fact that Gianna will grow up knowing that her father had made a difference in the world, but the fact that she cannot have a sweet 16, she cannot have him walk her down the aisle, she would not be able to have prom with the daddy dance. This is not something realistic. This is something, it's like a dream, but we all need to stand up for what is right.
All right.
All these activists and all these advocates, I thank you all. Definitely I thank you all. Because if you all didn't speak out, we wouldn't have had a lot of help. But the fact that the world, you got to think about Japan. You have to think about Germany. You have to think United Nations. You have to think Italy. I have so many different people I spoke to, Africa, all around the world, and they all think the same way. Your skin color should not define who you are.
Amen.
It should never be a weapon. And the fact that we're here standing today, still breathing, we're still fighting. Reverend Al always said, keep fighting.
Keep fighting.
And that's something I can't stop. I want to tell Miss Carr, I love you.
Yeah.
I know it's hard. That's Eric Garner's mom. I want to tell Breonna Taylor mom, I love you. Pamela Turner, I know it's hard. I want to tell Pamela Turner, that's Baytown, Texas.
Yeah.
This is not okay. Her daughter is walking around, and I know she's in tears every day thinking about her mother. Her mother was killed in point blank range, shot multiple times. So many different people all around the world who didn't even have this type of technology. I just want to reiterate, not just Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. We need to stand up and fight. Can't get comfortable, because when you get comfortable, people forget about you.
Amen.
So the legend will still live on. George is not here, but his spirit lives here. Breonna Taylor is not here, but the spirit still lives here. Eric Garner is not here, spirit still right here. But the fact that we're here fighting, I want all you all to stand up and fight. Thank you all so much.
And next we're going to have another brother of George who came all the way from New York. Brooklyn, New York.
In the house.
And as we introduce him, it's not lost on us as Attorney Stewart and Attorney Romanucci and I talk. It's always a journey to justice. Tony told me Laquan McDonough, who was found guilty, his killer, the police officer that killed him, shot him 14 times in the back on video. 16 times in the back on video. And he was convicted of second-degree murder, and he was only sentenced to 6 years. Botham Jones, who in Dallas, Texas, was killed in his own apartment.
Right.
The white policewoman Amber Geiger was found guilty of first-degree murder, Reverend Al, and she was only sentenced to 10 years. And Justin Miller, where was it, Walter Scott in South Carolina, same conviction, shot in the back, on video, convicted 20 years. So each step, each case, we keep making progress. We came too far to stop now. We have to keep going forward. And so that's why all the energy we have in this courtroom, we have to take to Capitol Hill, and we have to join Senator Cory Booker. We have to join Congresswoman Karen Bass, Senator Tim Scott. We got to say, you all, we need meaningful police reform. That's right. So we don't have to put up with these injustices. Seem like, Reverend Al, every other week there's a new hashtag. We can stop this, America. We're at the turning point. Terrence, Floyd, Brooklyn, New York.
Let me hear y'all say change.
Change.
Let me hear y'all say change.
Change.
That's right. Just like I heard y'all say change all together, that's how we're going to keep the change going together. Fight. Keep fighting. The way we got here is because of our fight and your fight together. Y'all hit the streets. We thankful for y'all, and we just. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed because I'm gonna tell you a quick story. I had a dream the other night. I was in a field. I was in a field in the south with my family, and I looked back and I saw a man. I saw a man coming up, walking, and I'm trying to figure out who is that. Who is that? I look. He gets closer, and all of a sudden I see the hat cocked to the side like this. Anybody that know me know who that is. That's my father. So he got close to me, and he gave me a smile, and he gave me a hug. I woke up. That dream was so real. I woke up hugging myself. So I knew. I was a little leery about the sentencing, but because of that, I knew that my father was saying, "You good? He's good. Keep doing what you're doing for me, for your brother, for your name." Because we Floyd strong, and we're gonna stay strong. Thank you.
Right. Well said. Thank you, Terrence. Next, we will hear from the nephew of George Floyd, who's like a brother, like a son in many regards to him, Brandon Williams.
Yeah.
It's funny that we got justice, but not enough justice. You know, I remember standing here the first day of trial in this very same spot, and we were very optimistic and unsure of what was going to happen. After seeing that video, we should have been 100% sure that we would be at a guilty conviction with a maximum sentence. When you think about George being murdered in cold blood with a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, execution style in broad daylight, 22 and a half years is not enough.
Right. Go ahead.
We were served a life sentence. We can't get George back. Gianna can't hug George again. He'll be able to hug his family possibly and see his family again. We can't get George back. So in retrospect, I feel that he should have received a life sentence as well.
Right.
What kind of message are you sending to our country? What kind of message are you sending to the younger kids like Gianna? That you can kill a man in cold blood and get a slap on the wrist? That's like a slap in the face to all of us standing up here. And everybody around the world who feel what we feel and saw that video. So I won't celebrate this. I won't celebrate it at all. But I will celebrate a guilty conviction on a police officer that killed a black man, because far too many times we see them kill us and get right away with it. I will celebrate this as a victory for Miss Tamika Palmer, who I'm very, very close with. I hope that Attorney Daniel Cameron out in Kentucky can follow Keith Edison's lead and charge the cops who killed Breonna Taylor. So there are some positive things to take from this. But this 22 and a half years just isn't one for me. Thank you.
All right. All right, Brandon.
Thank you.
From the heart, Brandon. And we have his brother, his baby brother, Rodney Floyd from Houston, Texas, 3rd Ward.
Hey, how y'all doing? You know, I would like to thank the protesters first, the local protesters. And in this city, I would like to thank all the protesters that came out across the country to this city and standing up in their cities as well, demanding change. we all have one thing in common. We want change for my brother's case. This right here is this 22-year sentence they gave this man. It's a slap on the wrist. We serving a life sentence and not having them in our life. And that hurts me to death. And looking at his daughter, beautiful daughter, Gianna, in her video, saying the first video, my dad changed the world. He did change the world. But at the end result, he gets a slap on the wrist. My nephew just said, 22 years from killing her dad, that she can't take her to school. He can't eat lunch with her. He can't conversate with her. I know with my daughter, I love my daughter. Hugs her, we talk, that's my little best friend. And I hate to see that he cannot have that, she can't have that connection with her father. Those great conversations, those wonderful phone calls, lighting up her face, you know. And around the world, black, white, brown, we all need to come together, take our bus to the Senate, stand out there, and demand this George Floyd Act be passed, and also, as well as the act being passed. We need to stand there, put pressure on this Senate. Right. You know, and I was thinking last night, guys, honestly, we heard Obama say this plenty of times, get out and vote. We hear so many folks say get out and vote. Everybody got out and voted and marched in these streets, and we got change. We got our first black president. A lot of people came together like they did now, my brother's death, and we got this. But guess what, people? We need to take that same energy and bring that back to that Senate and demand them pass that bill. Amen. Because as we've seen Trump numerous times stand up, fussing on camera numerous times, countless times, because he did not have the power that we thought he had to get something done. He had to call on the Senate. And we need to get out there, understand that message. Go to the Senate, put pressure on the Senate, and get these bills and laws passed for all of us. Amen. Can stand on with this American flag as one. And we, as black people, need to know this American flag represents us, because we feel it don't.
All right. Thank you, Rodney. And as we bring his cousin, Sharita, please understand, this is only one step in getting accountability in the criminal level. The federal charges are still pending. So I do believe that when Philonise and Terrence and Rodney say the maximum, it is still attainable to get maximum accountability for George Floyd. Say that. Maximum accountability for George Floyd. 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 Now you will hear from his cousin, Sharita Tate.
Come on, Sharita.
Hello, everybody. I won't spend a whole lot of time sort of reiterating what my family has already said. I think they have spoke very eloquently about how we dealt with this last year and our thought processes as it relates to the amount of time that Derek Chauvin was given. Truth be told, I don't think any sentence would be enough, because what truly would be justice would be for us to be able to have George back. But with that being said, I'd just like to take this time to thank the countless number of people that have been supportive of us since the very beginning. I remember when we first came here and we were talking about the sentence and the trial and what potentially the outcome would be. And as we sat through the trial and watched the murder over and over again and came back with the 3 convictions, then we all waited and waited for this day. I will have to say that we didn't get what we wanted. We definitely wanted to see the maximum penalty, but however, as they've already stated, we do have the federal ahead of us, and we are hoping that we can get some real accountability with him getting a life sentence. And lastly, I just want to speak on the Policing Act. You know, we've had it partially, it's before the Senate, and I would just say, echo what everyone else has said. We need this passed immediately. We need to really have some true accountability across the board. Thank you.
And finally, before we take a few of your questions, we have his cousin Tara Brown from Houston, Texas.
Okay.
Well, I just want to say, my family has spoken a lot about everything that we've gone through since we started this journey. And I will tell you, it definitely has been a journey for us. And as a family, we decided that we were committed to two things. For sure, we wanted to make sure that we got some measure of justice for George and for the countless other families who have lost loved ones in the way that we did. And the other thing is that we were committed to making sure that we force the change that we want to see and create this legacy that will live on forever. Just want to say thank you to everybody who has supported us throughout this journey, especially the protesters and the activists who have been nonstop and relentless, and they've helped us get to this point. And the other thing is, we want to say that this bill needs to get passed, and I want to make sure that we don't stop just with this bill, but it's important that you hold your states, elected officials accountable to that as well. We are also looking at the local level where they're making change. Even in our city, where we're from in Houston, there has been some changes already. Our mayor, Sylvester Turner, has banned chokehold, and we have qualified immunity is on the table. So we are keeping active, and we want to make sure that you stay in the fight. Please keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And finally, our national leader, Reverend Al Sharpton.
We're going to open up the questions for the family and all of us. Let me say this so you're clear. If there is conviction in the federal trial and he is convicted and the other three, that federal time can run after the 22 and a half years.
Amen.
It does not have to run concurrent, which is why we're saying that we still want full justice. Secondly, when we talk about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, we know the difference, Senate, between two slices of bread and a sandwich. A sandwich has meat between the two slices of bread. Don't come down with a compromise that is two slices of bread with no meat in the middle. Don't put George Floyd's name, a strong man, on a weak bill. Make sure that you talk to those in the family and those of us involved in this struggle before you make any compromise. The difference between a compromise and a sellout is in the eye of the appraiser.
Wow.
And we will be part of the appraiser. Questions?
I have a question with regard to the family, and I'd like to pose a question to one of the family members, whomever would like to answer it.
What's the question?
During his news conference in last June, Attorney General Ellison issued a clarion call to the arts and entertainment community to take the mantle in seeking justice. Any one of the family members can answer why that might be important to them or why it may not.
Why to get artists and entertainers involved. Philonis will attempt to answer your question, but we want to invite other families who are here who have lost loved ones due to police brutality to also come forward. Mr. Floyd, can you answer that question?
Ellison called entertainers to stand.
We may answer that question on the side for you. Okay.
Question about the case, sir.
Okay. Question about the case. And Attorney Stones, where are the other families?
Today in court, Derek Chauvin offered condolences to the family. I was wondering what you thought about that, and also Derek Chauvin's mother continued to say that her son was innocent and that people did not know her son like the family did. And I was wondering what you thought about those comments. The condolences from Derek Chauvin and the mother saying that her son was innocent and people did not know Derek Chauvin like her family did.
All right. I just thought about it as the same thing with my brother. People didn't know who my brother was. They labeled him. The trial was all about my brother. Instead, it should have been about Mr. Chauvin. So The things that she spoke about, I understand that because that's her son. Same way she spoke up for her son, I spoke up for my brother. So we all love our loved ones, but the fact that I will never see my brother again is worse because she still will have the opportunity to see her son in the cell anytime she wants to.
That's right. Let me say something about that with Philonis. When I heard his mother speak, and I respect any mother stand up for their son, but it reminded me, and I said it in the eulogy right here, that George called for his mother. And the one that seemed not to understand the bond between a mother and son, when a son would call for his mother that was no longer alive, was not the Floyd family, it was her son, Derrick. Because that did not make him stop when he heard a man call for his mother. I respect his mother. He did not respect George calling for his mother.
Thank you, Rev. We want to acknowledge Bishop Harding, who was over the Salvation Army where George worked, and George did so much great. So let's acknowledge and give him a round of applause for the great work they do. Now we're going to turn it over to a lady who needs no introduction here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She's a lawyer, she's an activist, and she's a freedom fighter. Y'all give it up for my sister, Nakima. And she's going to introduce some other families. Please, Queen.
Good afternoon. It's our honor to stand here with the family of George Floyd and the lawyers who continue to represent this family in their continued pursuit of justice. This is one step towards progress, but this is not justice, and this is not full accountability as the family has asked for. I'm Nakima Levy-Armstrong. I'm a civil rights attorney based here in Minneapolis, and I'm standing next to Tashira Garraway, who is part of Family Supporting Families Against Police Violence, Jaylani Hussein from CARE Minnesota, and Michelle Gross from Communities United Against Police Brutality. And we are all here as people who stand on the front lines with the folks who are here from the Twin Cities who hold it down time and time again. We got to give it up for the activists and the organizers who face rubber bullets, tear gas, arrests, and demonization for standing up for George Floyd and all stolen lives. This incident today of Derek Chauvin being sentenced is something that we've been waiting for a long time. The sad part about his sentence is that we know that black men often receive more time for doing less than what Derek Chauvin did. There are plenty of black men and Latino men in prison for nonviolent drug offenses. But here we have a veteran officer who was literally able to lynch someone in broad daylight in the presence of children and other witnesses and essentially get a proverbial slap on the wrist. That is not acceptable. Judge Cahill should have held him accountable to the fullest extent of the law. It is not enough that he has received the most time from compared to other police officers who have killed people. This is a new day. It's not based on what they did in the past when they could lynch us and get away with it, when they could brutalize us and get away with it, when they could kill people and get away with it. Just because it's the most time does not mean that it is enough time. So we will continue to stand up and fight alongside this family and everyone else who cares about justice in demanding that the federal government now step in and hold Derek Chauvin and those other 3 police officers who were involved in killing George Floyd accountable to the fullest extent of the law. If the federal government had stepped in a long time ago, George Floyd might still be alive today. So that is the least that they can do in this situation. And I want to encourage all the activists, the organizers, the community members who are sitting at home to get off the couch and come down to the government center to stand in solidarity with Family Supporting Families and other organizing groups, as well as a 9 o'clock nighttime peaceful demonstration that's going to happen downtown. Thank you all for being here. Realize we're not asleep in the Twin Cities, and we're going to continue to stand up and fight for justice. Thank you.
love you.
My name is Tashira Garraway. I am the founder of Family Supporting Families Against Police Violence. I am also the mother of Justin Tigan's 15-year-old son, who was brutally beat to death by the St. Paul police and thrown inside of a trash dumpster August 19, 2009. I stand here in solidarity with Emmett Till's family, Travis Jordan family, Brian Quinonez family, Demetrius Hill, Jafford Smith, and so many other family, Kobe Heisler, Derek, Jacob Blake's family, so many other families that have led up to George Floyd and that have lost loved ones after George Floyd. I want the world to know that there is a group of families that are fighting together, that is standing up for justice, that is standing up in solidarity. And we ask that those voices be paid attention to. We ask that those voices that you do not hear about, those stories that have been swept under the rug, that people have not heard, we ask that you hear those voices. Because they were not successful with covering up George Floyd's murder does not mean that the rest of the murders are not just as important. The rest of the lives are just as important, and we want everyone to hear from those families. So I stand here to fight for those families. We will not back down. We will not be quiet in this time, but we are holding up the rest of the families that have taken the same loss as George Floyd family. We are very thankful for the little bit of crumbs that they did give us today with holding this officer accountable. But just like George Floyd is the face of hundreds of murders around Minnesota that have been covered up, so is Derek Chauvin the face of hundreds of killer cops that are still out here walking around in our communities on the forces still serving. They have brutalized family members. They have brutalized the community, and we need these officers held accountable just like they held Derek Chauvin accountable today. We need the rest of these officers held accountable as well, and we cannot be quiet about that and not hold them accountable like we held Derek Chauvin accountable. Thank you. We have Courtney Ross, the girlfriend of George Floyd, here today as well, standing in solidarity with the rest of our families as well. Thank you.
Brother Blake.
My name is Jacob Blake. The verdict was handed down today, and we have no choice but to accept it. We don't have to be happy with it, but we accept it.
Go ahead, brother.
Is it enough? No.
Yes, sir.
But when we accept it, we must. We must say Bismillah. Because God knows best. We must not hold hatred. But we have to stay diligent out here in these streets, because nobody's going to give